Hello everyone, welcome to Indian Economy by Aman Soni. In today's news hour, we'll be discussing the important articles related to economy from the Hindu newspaper. In page 1, we don't have any news related to economy. Let's go to the editorial page. Here this editorial is related to the corporate governance fiasco in the NSE. In the previous news hour, we have observed that the CEO of the NSE has been leaking the information to some unknown person who has been controlling the corporate governance there indirectly. So this article throws light on the corporate governance that the SEBI has to take care and the mandate of SEBI to protect the investor interests. So it says that as the regulator of the markets, it is the primary duty and mandate of the SEBI to protect the interest of the small investors. And the SEBI had to take measures to control the violations that has been taken by the CEO and MD of the NSE. Even during the 2015 and the 2017, the nomination and remuneration committee, they had flagged several irregularities in the governance structure, but the NSE board, it had not taken any action, and even the SEBI had been complicit in taking the action against the perpetrators. And even during an external audit by the firm EY, they concluded that irregularities have been happening in the appointment of a certain person who is not fit for the job. And several complaints were received by the SEBI, but it had not taken action on those complaints, and finally even now the SEBI is still not able to make out who is that unknown person who has been controlling the decisions under the NSE board, colluding with the CEO. So the article says that as the regulator, it is the duty of the SEBI to protect the interests of the investors and make sure that the corporate governance happens in even stock exchanges. There is another article related to the budget allocations in the agricultural sector. Let's go through it. There has been criticism that the allocation for agriculture during the current budget was not enough, but the author here says that it was given to the right priority sectors. So what are those sectors? Let's go through it. The author says we need to look at the allocations from the perspective of growth in the agriculture sector and the farmers' income, because even during the pandemic, if there is one sector that has been unaffected by the pandemic and has been performing well, it is the agricultural sector, because the growth rates have been 4.3% and 3.6%, which is decent for the Indian agricultural sector. And within the agricultural sector, the best performers were the livestock and the fisheries. These two subsectors on an average performed at a growth rate of 8%, and the majority of the gross value added in the agricultural sector is from these two sectors. Around 33% of the gross value added in the agricultural sector is mainly from the livestock and fisheries sector, and more than 15% of the farmers' household income is derived from the livestock sector. So if the government wants to focus on improve the agricultural sector, the focus has to be on the livestock and fisheries sector. For this, the government has taken various steps and increased the allocations for these two subsectors in the budget. That's why the author is saying you have to focus on these to improve the agricultural productivity and incomes, and the government has rightly increased the allocations for these two subsectors. And what are the schemes for which the allocations have been increased? Let's go through that. The allocations have been increased for the Livestock Health and Disease Control Program and the National Livestock Mission, which promotes the livestock and poultry and other allied sector investments. and the scheme for the fishery sector, that is the Pradhan Mantri Matsya Sampada Yojana, for that the allocation has been increased. In all this, you need to know the details about the schemes, and you need not go through the amount that has been increased, because that is not important for our exam. We need to know about the schemes and what are they related to. And the allocations have also been increased for the production linked incentive scheme in the food processing, and even in food processing for the micro food processing, where the major number of MSCs are performing, the allocations have been increased. And the holistic development of agricultural scheme, that is the Rashtriya Krishi Vikas Yojana, even for that particular scheme the allocations have been increased. And other schemes related to crop productivity, that is the Pradhan Mantri Krishi Sinchai Yojana, which increases the crop productivity, and the Paramparagat Krishi Vikas Yojana, which focuses on the increasing soil fertility and production of healthy and organic food, that is the zero budget natural farming. Even for that scheme the allocations have been increased. And to increase the infrastructure in the agriculture, the agricultural infrastructure scheme, almost the allocations have been increased by 150%. And same with the case with the FPO scheme, the farmer produce organization schemes. On all these schemes which are related to livestock and fisheries, the allocations have been increased. But on the flip side, the allocations have been decreased for various schemes which deal with the output, which deal with the price support and subsidies. And what are those? The PM Asha scheme, Pradhan Mantri Annadata Ay Sanrakshan Abhiyan, which is related to MSP, the allocations have been reduced and it has been very less. The author says probably the reason for that is the government has set up a committee for dealing with the MSP. So maybe the government is waiting for the report of that particular committee. And even when it comes to the market intervention scheme, price support scheme, the allocations have been reduced. And for the price stabilization fund, which deals with the volatility in prices of the perishable goods like top goods, the tomato, onion, potato, the allocations have been reduced. And even when it comes to food and fertilizer subsidy, the allocations have declined. So the author says, when it is good that certain subsectors like the livestock and poultry, the allocations have increased. On food and fertilizer, which are important, the allocations have been decreased, which should have been higher. And probably this will prompt the people to invest in other technologies like the Kisan drones, startups to improve the farm produce, adaptation of modern technology. When you reduce the subsidies, people would go for investing in the technology to improve the productivity, because the output subsidies have been reduced. So the government probably expects people to go for this technology adoption, and that should enable the even the younger generation to consider agriculture as a career option. For now, the government is focusing on the three main subsectors, that is the livestock, fisheries and food processing, which adds tremendous value to agriculture, because Indian agriculture and rural development, they are related to each other, because the main incomes of the rural people in India is from the agricultural income. Around 40% of rural incomes of a household is comprised of agricultural wages. So if you want to have rural development, you have to increase the agricultural sector. That is why the focus has been on the following subsectors. So the author says the allocation has been right in the budget for the agricultural sector. On open editorial page, there is a relationship between how power tariffs and the growth of a state are related. Let's go through that article. In India, states perform differently when it comes to growth. So they are divided into the low income states and the high income states. And in the low income states, there are reasons for the low income because they have low accessibility to credit. So if they can't access the bank credit, the investments would be low. And even the low power availability in those states, and the low power availability leads to higher cost. Because of the higher cost, lower credit, no investor wants to invest in those particular states, and they remain low income states. Whereas on the other hand, the six high income states like Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, Gujarat, Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh, just these six states account for almost 56% of the factories and 54% of the net value added to the country. So in these six states, there are almost 56% of the factories situated, and the population of these states is just 32%. And why is this mismatch between low income states and high income states? It is because the high income states have higher access to credit and finance, because of which the investments increase, and the power tariffs in these particular states are low. In the low income states, only 15% have access to institutional credit and 5% have access to industrial credit. And the share of the low income states in terms of population is 43%. So you can see the stark mismatch between the low income states and higher income states, where on the one hand we have states with less population having high number of factories and they are performing well in terms of growth, and state with more population and less access to credit and they are performing badly in industries. So the author says, does the power has any role in playing in the disparity? Does power cause any disparity in the growth and development of the particular states? He says yes. The availability of adequate quality power at cheap rates will attract investment. If the cost of power is less and the accessibility to finance is high, an investor would want to invest in such state. So because of which the investment increases, jobs increase, and finally the growth output of the state and GDP of the state will increase. And now the electricity tariffs vary between states and states. So there are different state taxes because electricity is a state subject. So the tariffs vary between different states, because of which currently the low income states are ending up paying higher taxes on electricity duty and higher cost for electricity duty because they don't have access to power generation like the idle power generation. So for that we need reforms in the electricity. And what are those reforms? First, we need to eliminate the price discrimination in the power sector. And how to eliminate the price discrimination? Because states who have idle power, they have access to low power and the prices would be low, and low income states which do not have access would be paying higher rates. So just like one nation one tax of GST, we need to go for a concept of one nation one grid and one frequency, so that wherever in the country the rate of electricity would be the same because the entire nation is connected as one electric grid. And we need to go for one tariff policy so that there won't be any difference between the cost of purchase of electricity between different states. And the other reason being, we have to include the electricity under the goods and services tax. Currently the states are imposing different tax rates on power consumption, and if we get the electricity under the GST, the entire SGST will go to the states, and the CGST says has to be distributed to the states under the Finance Commission devolution norms because electricity is a state subject and it has to go to the states. So even though we are levying the CGST, it has to be allocated to the states under the Finance Commission norms. That way, when we have same tariff policy all over the country and we have one nation, one grid, one tariff policy, the access to electricity would be equal, so that there will be equal opportunity for all the states to grow. That's about this article. Let's move forward. There are no news related to economy in the news page and world page. We don't need to read the articles in MoneyWise. They are technical in nature and not important for exam. In the text and context, we have an article related to the Prevention of Money Laundering Act. The article discusses the negative points of the Money Laundering Act. Before that, the author begins with the introduction. Why was this act enacted? The Prevention of Money Laundering Act was brought in 2002 in response to India's commitment to certain global conventions like the Vienna Convention to combat the menace of money laundering from certain illegal activities like drug trade, narcotics trade, etc. So in order to follow the rules of the Vienna Convention, India also got act in accordance with the global conventions. And what are the other global conventions dealing with money laundering? They are the United Nations Convention Against Illicit Trade in Narcotic Drugs, the 40 recommendations of the FATF, Political Declaration and Global Program of Actions by the UN, and another resolution passed by the UN in the special session countering world drug problem together. So all these problems led the global community to come together and pass laws against the money laundering. And the article gives example of how Money Laundering Act has been used to book cases against various political opponents. We don't need to go much into the details of the people. We just need to know what are the things that can be misused in the act. The court at various occasions has said that money laundering is a crime which affects the entire economy. Entire economy is the victim of the crime, and each and every citizen is affected by this, because when you are laundering money and not paying tax and you are getting the proceeds from an illegal activity, it is affecting every taxpayer and every citizen, because they are foregoing the benefit of the tax amount which could be used by the government for the benefit of the nation. And the critics of the Money Laundering Act says, currently the Money Laundering Act has been misused by the government to harass its political opponents. And for that they state certain reports. One of the Finance Ministry reports says that between 2011 to 2020, the Enforcement Directorate has conducted around 1,700 raids and launched special investigation in around 1,600 of it. And out of this 1,700 and 1,600 investigations, conviction could be got only in 9 of the cases. So you can see the amount of mismatch between the number of investigations and the conviction rate. This could be possible because of various reasons, like the ED couldn't get enough proof to prove the conviction, or the ED didn't have enough case to make and convict the person. So it can be various reasons. And the critics of the act says this is because one of the reasons is the political motivations behind booking cases. The government is booking cases against a dissenter or a political rival to harass them. How true is that? So let's look into it. And other things which the critics say, that the assets of even the genuine victims have been attached, because ED could walk into anybody's house with the warrant and attach your victims as soon as the case begins. In all this, the fundamental purpose of having the Prevention of Money Laundering Act, that is to investigate into the conversion of illegitimate money into the legitimate money that is being lost. The basic purpose of the act is to make sure that illegitimate money is not converted into legal money, but you're just conducting in investigations and not able to get convictions. The basic purpose of the act is lost. And just like FIR in a police case, when an ED conducts investigation under the Money Laundering Act, it will book a information report called ECIR, that is Enforcement Case Information Report, and this document is an internal document by the ED, and ED won't share it with even the accused. This is an exception to the criminal procedure law, where the accused has to know on what grounds and what cases he is being tried under the court of law. So the critics say that because of this secretive nature of the ECIR, that is the Enforcement Case Information Report, the accused doesn't know the allegations on him, and the ED is not bound to give the document to the accused. So the Money Laundering Act doesn't distinguish between an accused and a witness. As soon as the case begins, the ECIR will be lodged, and before they commence the investigation, the ECR would be launched, which is wrong, because only when we can prove that a particular person has got money from offenses related to the Prevention of Money Laundering Act, and he has made sure that to launder this money, to make it look like a legal money which is got from an illegal source, only then the ECR report has to be lodged. But now what happens is, first, as soon as the FIR is booked, the ECR report is lodged, then the accused doesn't know what are the grounds, what is the case on him that is made by the ED. So the petitioners say that this is arbitrary, vague and fanciful. The reforms have to be got so that the innocent won't be harassed under the Prevention of Money Laundering Act. The criticism of this act could be noted on, and we could write in the answers related to the reforms under Money Laundering Act. There is another article related to the Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement between India and UAE. In the previous articles in the news, we have discussed how the trade agreement between India and UAE would benefit each other. Now let's go through the details of it again. Recently, India and UAE signed the Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, and under this free trade agreement, almost 90% of India's exports would be covered. That includes items like leather, processed agricultural and dairy products, handicrafts, gems and jewelry, furniture, pharma, food products, etc. And the speciality about this free trade agreement is that apart from goods, it also includes the services sector. And another speciality of this FTA is this also has measures related to anti-dumping, so that no other country, third-party country, would through the UAE won't be able to dump into India. For that, they have certain rules of origin clauses. Rules of origin clause means the product description has to contain where the good has been manufactured. For example, China, if this particular clause is not there, China could on the paper send the goods to UAE, and from UAE it can export to India and get reduced tariffs because India and UAE has FTA agreement. This would be misuse of the agreement. So to avoid that, we have rules of origin. So on that particular product, it would be mentioned where is the manufacturing of the good happened, so that the Indian customs officials would know what is the origin country of the product, so that we can levy the right amount of taxes. And to make sure that a 40% value addition has to be happened in the product in UAE to say that that particular product has been exported from UAE. If China sends an intermediary product to UAE, adds value addition to the extent of 40%, that would be like a product manufactured in UAE. It is processed in UAE. So at that time, the product would get the benefit of free trade between India and UAE. If the percentage of value addition is less than 40%, then that product won't get the benefit of free trade. This is done to protect the country from dumping from a third country which doesn't have the free trade agreement between India and that country. So how will the trade pact between India and UAE help us? The main relationship between India and the Arab nations are the flow of remittance between the Gulf countries and India. The UAE has around 3 million Indians working there who send remittances to the country every year. Around 82% of India's remittances originated from just 7 countries, and of these 7 countries there are many Gulf countries like UAE, Saudi, Oman and Kuwait. In 2019, India received around $83 billion of remittances just from the Gulf region. This has reduced during the COVID because the workers came back, but it's going to pick up again because once the pandemic reduces, the workers would be going back and start working there. And the FDI will help the remittances because the FDI will help the Indian investments in UAE, and when Indian companies would invest there in UAE, it would have certain number of Indian employees migrate there and work in those Indian companies in managerial roles, so that the remittances would again increase in the future. And why did Modi call the region as Western Quad? The countries like Israel, India, UAE and US together are known as the Western Quad. Because of the diplomatic breakthrough between Israel and UAE, the trade between those two countries increases, which are beneficial to the trade partners like India and USA. UAE is situated in a strategic region where it would have access to South Asia on one side and to the Mediterranean coast and Turkey on the other side. So a country having trade pact with a country like UAE is important for India. And in the Western Quad, USA and UAE are the biggest trade partners of India, and Israel is among the countries which supply technology for Indians. So all these 4 connected in a grouping would benefit all the 4. That would make the trade pacts between the countries more stronger. So what are the immediate benefits of the free trade agreement between India and UAE? The free trade agreement will allow goods from UAE, especially the dates and other dry fruits from the UAE, and major Indian items are going to get zero tariff, so that the Indian goods exports to UAE would increase. And even the reduced tariffs on Indian jewelry and gems would allow greater volumes of exports to the Arab nation. And how is this comprehensive partnership different from the other agreements India is having with Australia and other countries? The other agreements are generally in the nature of interim agreements. That is, before you go for a final agreement, you are going to have an agreement for the time being. That agreement is known as interim agreement. But this FTA is very comprehensive in nature. Directly we are including the goods, services, measures related to anti-dumping, so that this is comprehensive in nature. And whereas the other interim agreements are mainly related to goods and products, this comprehensive economic partnership agreement is inclusive in the sense that it includes both goods and services. And the agreement is going to get kickstart sometime after the May 1st. That's the article about India UAE Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement. And in the last page, we have a study related to unemployment benefits and employment. During the pandemic in USA, certain state governments gave unemployment benefits so that the unemployed people could sustain themselves during the pandemic. But various states felt that because of providing the unemployment benefits, the people would stop working and they may not go for employment, because when I can get free money without working, why would I want to work? That is the basic human tendency, basic human nature. I am getting something without putting any effort, so that I would want the effort to continue, the benefit to continue, and I would not want to go back to work again. This is the human tendency. So the states have suddenly cut the unemployment benefits that they were giving. So the study is about whether this is true, and the study concludes that the states where the unemployment benefits were provided, the number of people going from unemployment to employment reduced slowly. But the study also says that we can't have such direct correlations between unemployment benefits and the employment, because it would have indirect effects on the economy, like where the unemployment benefits are provided, the confidence of the households to consume remained high. Their confidence to pick up jobs in the future remained high. So even though the fact that providing too many unemployment benefits would deter people from going for employment because they are getting some free benefits, it would have other indirect effects on the economy. Those are the articles related to economy today. Thank you so much.